Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special late night edition of Halsey Live. We have Dr. Brian of London with us to talk about the Indigenous Israel, which I'm actually quite excited to hear more about myself. Brian, before we get started, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Oh, this is one of those moments where you've done the stupid thing and held the other video open. There we go. Close that down. Hi, I'm Brian of London, but I am not in London. I'm in Tel Aviv.
Very nice. Where can they find you on Twitter and various social profiles and things like that?
Yeah, Brian of London. That's my Twitter handle. I write on a website called Israeli Cool. If you Google any combination of those words, you'll find it. And Brian of London, Brian John Thomas on Facebook, but Brian of London on Twitter is the best place to find me and talk to me.
Awesome. And as everyone knows, you can find me at halseynews.com. You can email me at info@halseynews.com. You can find me on Twitter at Halsey English, or you can find me on Facebook at Halsey News Network. I am on Gab at Real Halsey, but I hardly ever go on there, so don't expect that you'll be able to communicate with me through that platform very easily. So let's jump right into it. You said you got something really cool as a way of looking, Israeli cool, little pun, as a way of looking at Israel and as an indigenous state. So take it away.
Well, Israel is actually one of the only revived indigenous states ever. So the way I see myself here in Israel, I'm, obviously pale skinned as people want to point out to me, but and I didn't grow up in Israel. But as soon as I arrived here, and you'll appreciate this because you spent some time here.
Yeah, part of 10 years.
Exactly. If you grow up as a Jew anywhere in the world and you follow even the sort of the loosest Jewishness, you follow a set of traditions and customs that originated here. And it's like drummed into you. It's obvious. It's absolutely axiomatic. We just had Passover, Pesach. Next year in Jerusalem, we say at the end. And the Haggadah that says that, the book, the script, the what we read to our kids, that whole story is focused on getting to Israel. And those same books have been used, that same thing has been used by Jews all over the world for 1,000 years.
Yep.
It all revolves around this place. And what that means is not that I came from Israel personally, not that everyone around me was born here, but we are all following traditions and customs and a whole status that began here.
For sure.
And that's what indigenous means. And there is actually a formal definition of the word indigenous and what indigenous status is, which was accepted by, it was put forward by an academic, and the UN talks about it and so forth. We tick every single box. Jews, the Jews who are here. Ancestral lands, we've got stuff buried all over the place. It's just obvious. We have a common ancestry with the original inhabitants of the land now. We can get into sort of complex details of Canaanites and replacements and subsumation and the changes that went on when we became Jewish. But it doesn't even rely on the status of being indigenous doesn't rely on any one thing, but it's all of them together. And I learned this all from a native Canadian, actually. Well, he calls himself a Native American or a First People, or actually he does call himself an Indian, and he comes from a tribe in northern Canada. And it was him that first pointed this out, that we've allowed the Arabs here to basically try and replace the language that we use. So they call themselves indigenous. It's just nonsense. It's total nonsense.
Oh, completely.
Arabic Islamic culture was not from here.
I don't even know how they get away with any of the crap they get away with in claiming origination in the land. Because, the mountains of historical evidence that prove that it's just not true are way greater than anything that a Jew can use to prove that they are part of the land.
It's not, and this is something that I've watched your videos and your debates with the alt-right with some interest and then I've gone and looked at how the alt-right talks about Israel, and they're completely and utterly baffled by Israel because firstly, they read only very what I would call anti-Israel sources. They read the far left version of Israel. They read Mondo Weiss. They read Haaretz. They read sources that, as far as I'm concerned, are working every day, day in, day out to destroy Jewish Israel. You know that.
100%.
And those same sources, which would be hideously anti-right-wing in America, they are the cultural Marxists. They are the enemies of, proper normal people, as far as I'm concerned. That's what the alt-right believes on Israel. So right now, we're having this thing going on the border at Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
The alt-right will be watching all of the negative coverage with glee, and they'll be saying how terrible Jews are and how terrible Israel is for defending its own border. You flip that around to Mexicans storming the border on the southern America, and they'll be build a wall. Which is it?
I've already been asked about it maybe 7 times tonight. And I mean, I just came out of Pesach a couple hours ago, so I mean, I've already been inundated with questions about it. Like, how do I excuse this? And I'm like, I'm not trying to excuse it or not excuse it. I mean, I don't even know what you're talking about, to tell you the truth.
I mean, the best way of saying that is if 30,000 people are all gathered together in front of the massed array of, we've probably got 15 or 20 tanks. We haven't taken the shot.
Nope.
We have not taken the shot. Are we genocidal or not? If we're genocidal, we're the worst genociders in history because, and I mean, I always tell this, actually, this is a good one. From 2014, I went and actually looked at the casualty statistics. At no point during the peak of the 2014 war was the replacement birth rate in Gaza lower than the number of people killed in military action.
Oh, I know. As I've said this often, that if there really was a plan to genocide any type of people in Israel, we would be really, really, really bad at it. Because a country that basically has nuclear arms, that has every Western type weapon that could possibly be available, and yet I think the numbers for the last 2 years of people killed on the Palestinian side were somewhere along the lines of 2,000 in the last 2 years. Like, more people get hurt in furniture accidents.
This is exactly correct. And I mean, there's other small details, but back on the indigenous thing, what happened was the website Israeli Cool has for a long time, very long time, been doing all the sort of countering of BDS and talking about celebrities who come here, sometimes light stuff, sometimes heavy stuff. And there was a move in America to take over one of the academic institutions that looks at Native studies, I think the American Studies Association. And this is what always happens: is a small group, usually Soros-funded, open society sort of backed, they try and take over an academic institution, and with the goal that then they'll turn this academic institution into a bastion of BDS, boycott, divestment, sanction. And this started happening to the American Studies Association, and they came at them. They always tailor their messages. They're very, very good, the other side. They tailored the message to say the Palestinians are the indigenous people and the Jews are the settler colonials who came here suddenly in 1948. We turned up and kicked everybody off their land. That is their narrative, and they've been damn good at sticking to it.
For sure.
And if I don't think Israelis and Jews have done a very good job at all over the years of kicking back on that. They haven't, basically. And what I found, my friend and I found this guy, Ryan, writing in kind of semi-obscure, almost academic, but not quite academic journals on what it is to be indigenous. And he said, you are being taken for a complete ride, you idiots. You are supporting the Arab imperialist, Islamic conquering aggressor against the real indigenous people. Israel is the example for you, the Native Americans. If you want to look at this from a Native American standpoint, you've got it ass backwards. The Jews were there, the history, the land. Every time, I'm sitting on the coast. I'm right next to the Med is about 1 kilometer outside this window. That way is the hills. It's only 20, 30, less than 20, 30 kilometers, and you get to the old green line that marks the armistice. In the hills up there, the hills overlooking the coastal plain and also on the coastal plain, if you ever find an archaeological site, a dwelling, you dig down, you find the fire pit, and you look at the bones. And very often you will find pits where there are no pig bones. You know some Hebrew. Hebrew doesn't even have the word. You know, most animals have got two words, one for the animal and one for the food. Beef and cow. Well, Hebrew doesn't have a word, an eating word for pig. We've got the word for pig. There were pigs indigenous to this area. And we don't need them, as everyone knows. Well, all over the place, you find 3,000, 4,000, 5,000-year-old sites where we already were not eating pig.
Right, and that goes back right from the beginning.
It's right from the beginning, and so you know that the people who were living on the hills up there, and then increasingly on the plains where I am now, upwards of 4,000 years ago, were following a similar rule book to the way we're living today. They were, and that is an incredible connection. I mean, a bit more recently in the South Hebron hills near Hebron. Hebron itself is an amazing story. But even outside of Hebron, there's a town there, a sort of an uncovered archaeological site there. You go there, you find the remains of about it's post-Roman. It's actually post the destruction of the Second Temple. You find the remains of a synagogue there. And there's a little plaque in what is recognizable Hebrew. You can read it. And it basically says that the name of this rich Jew, Cohen, actually, because it was a Cohenim place, he paid for the plaster on the walls of the new synagogue. I mean, it's exactly the same sort of little plaque you'll find in any synagogue in Florida.
Yeah. I mean, Hebron is by far like my favorite place in Israel. So I've spent quite a bit of time there, and I've always been amazed at the level of history that's there, that's completely denied by the leftist press and by the Arabs.
Well, you know, I'm actually fairly new to going to Hebron. I mean, because to be honest, I was scared by the you know, even in Israel, we get a constant diet of how dangerous it is to go to Hebron. And it's technically quite easy to just drive there from Tel Aviv.
Right.
There's one sort of checkpoint. I was taken there first on a bus, but after I'd been there on the bus trip, I thought, why am I not coming here? There's fantastic parking. It's really easy. You can park right outside the big Machpelah, the cave of the patriarchs, which is not really a cave. It's a huge, giant. It's a structure very much like people are familiar, the Western Wall.
Yeah, I would say it's even more prominent.
It's more prominent because there's more of it, because it's pretty much intact and complete. But it's the same stonework, giant stones that you have. You look at them with just this. How on earth did you ever put a stone up there without all this equipment that we have today? It's still a staggering thing, and that Jews did it, and we know Jews did it because they wrote about it, and they wrote about it in a book that's so important to the entire Western world. It's impossible to underestimate the importance of that tome, our Hebrew Bible translated and becomes the Christian Bibles that, and it's Easter as well. It's Monday, right? I don't even know the days here.
I guess it's Monday here now because it's past midnight, but I mean, I totally hear you. And it actually is. I mean, granted, I also fell for the whole danger thing, like when I was on my flight over there, but my own naivety, like I just didn't think, I thought, how dangerous could it actually be? And it was the first place I went, the first Shabbos that I was in Israel was in Hebron. And at one point, we were actually in the old city.
Oh, really? In the old city. Okay.
And I was there, and me and a buddy were like, oh man, I need to go have a cigarette. So, we kind of like walked out of the hostel we were staying in, and we went to go have a cigarette. And like these soldiers were like yelling at us and we were trying to figure out what they were yelling about. And we were about to just stroll into a Palestinian area that was under complete Palestinian control, you know, and then we told him, we're like, oh, we're just going for a cigarette. And he's like, oh, well, just come up here. So we went and hung out in like a gun turret for like the whole night with them and just, you know, bullshitted about the area and stuff. And it really was like an experience, you know?
You were here during the I don't like to call it intifada, but that's the word everybody recognizes. And I prefer to call it a jihad uprising. But were you here during the second intifada?
Yeah, I got there in 2002. Was
okay.
when I had arrived.
Because I married in 2000, but then my wife moved to the UK. So, but through that period, I was coming back twice or sometimes 3 times a year with her to see her family and stuff. And in fact, I was here Pesach 2001 when there was this string of suicide bombings and bus blowings and the terrible massacre of the Seder in Netanya.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that was a very tense time, and I think it's hard. You know, it's very hard for people who have not spent lots of time here to understand the Israeli reaction, which is it's bewildering to some Americans because, you know, when something blows up here, or when it used to blow up, there is this move to get everything back to normal very fast. You do not cordon off the area. You do not blow up the building. The Park Hotel that massacre happened in is still there. You know, they just rebuilt it. The cafes and the thing is, you get stuff open again. There's a very resilient feature to it. And this comes back to why were the Jews able to win the war in 1948, or at least survive to 1949 into an armistice? We're, you know, massively undermanned, facing real proper armies. The Jordanian army was trained by the British. It had British tanks. It had British heavy weaponry, all and training. The parts of the Jordanian army that took Gush Etzion, which are the hills to the south of Jerusalem, that was a totally regular, proper army, and it was facing a bunch of kibbutzniks and Holocaust survivors
that were under complete arms embargo by the rest of the world. I think only the Czech Republic was willing to sell us guns at that point. Correct.
I mean, growing up actually in London, one of the people who used to come to our Seder, now passed away, was one of the earliest pilots in the IDF, and he had stolen a Messerschmitt. He'd come across from Europe stealing a Messerschmitt, and others had stolen their Spitfires from the Polish squadrons of the RAF. They literally flew them here. But the whole point, the reason we won, actually, to skip to the end, is because we're defending something that's precious to us. And the reason the Arabs are losing every single time is because it's an invented identity. They're backing. And again, there was a very determined change in the mid-60s in the way they saw themselves, the Arabs. So when they were fighting to get rid of Israel the first time, and it was the Arab armies of Iraq and Jordan and Syria and Egypt and others, when they fought to take over the land, they saw themselves as the giant Arabs. That this was good for their internal soul.
Right.
This is how they think. They want to think of themselves as Goliath. That feels good to them. And we were the David, and the world actually saw us that way up until probably sometime around the mid-60s. And then a change happened in the language. They came up with what I think is one of the most brilliant pieces of identity theft ever. Now, the Quran already steals our identity. The Quran is full of Jewish stuff just jumbled up, mixed around. And it's clear that Muhammad, you know, he first tried to win over the Jews by peaceful persuasion. And when that didn't work, Mecca, Medina, he switched to the whole warlord crap. And what the Arabs did after sort of leading up to, and then after 67 especially, when they fought their massive war and they just lost. They lost everywhere badly, very, very badly. Syria lost the Golan Heights. We took those. The whole of Judea, Samaria, we won back. You know, I would always say that Judea and Samaria were illegally occupied by Jordan in the period from 48 to 67. That's fairly clear. Because again, that land, Hebron in the middle, in the south, Jerusalem in the middle, Shechem, which Shechem is the nearest sort of major Arab place to me. It's called Nablus by the Arabs. Nablus, what does that name mean? Is it an indigenous name? Do you know where Nablus comes from?
I actually don't.
Nobody knows. I'll tell you why. It's because it comes from Neapolis, which is the Roman. After the destruction of Jerusalem, they built a new city, and they called it New City, Neapolis. That's it. And Nablus is the Palestinian Arab version of Neapolis. As you know, the Arabic language has no P sound in it.
I know. So I always find that funny about the Palestinians, that they can't even pronounce their own name.
So, because their name is comes from Pelesh, Palestina, comes from the Roman
invaders.
Exactly. And every single part of the story they've created for themselves just doesn't back up. But and it comes down to this. This is they're always fighting so hard to displace us. And what we have going for us Jews here is we really are attached to this land. Mm-hmm. It's something that I've never seen non-Jews, or it takes a rare non-Jew to spend enough time to understand what that attachment really means. And there's another aspect. I mean, language, for example. It wasn't obvious that Israel was going to pick Hebrew as the spoken language here.
No, in fact, there was more of a movement for Yiddish.
There was Yiddish. There were some people saying it should be French, English, because, they were looking at where Jews were coming from, what would be easiest. But and the religious, there is a strong Orthodox argument for not using Hebrew, which I'm sure you're aware of, but maybe some of the people watching are. The argument for not using Hebrew is that Hebrew is the language of the Torah, and to sully that language with day-to-day stuff, to discuss Bibi Netanyahu's corruption with that language sullies the language, because language is so fundamental. But in the end, it was decided to use Hebrew and to revive Hebrew, and to basically the Hebrew we speak in Israel, or that I speak badly. It is recognized. It's very recognizable with the Torah. I mean, when I watch my kids at the Seder reading from the Haggadah, and I'm thinking back to my childhood, where to learn the Manish Tanakh questions was like it was an achievement. It was a goal. It was something you had to practice for. And my kids just, they get to the age of 7, 8, they just, oh look, it's just words on a page. I can read these.
Right.
Oh gosh, and I'm thinking of my son's bar mitzvah in a couple of years, and I'm thinking, well, where's the challenge in that? It's like reading Harry Potter. I mean, it's not.
I know. I felt the same way when I was there. It was always crazy that things I considered a real challenge in the Hebrew language or in anything else were just everyday things to these kids.
Yeah. And I mean, they'll never, maybe only much later will they consciously understand what I'm talking about when I tell them this. But that revival of an ancient language, it never went away. It was always used for prayer. It's been used continuously for prayer. You can see, again, like I say, there's 1,000, 2,000-year-old inscriptions that I can just pick up and read sort of slowly. That language is an incredibly powerful part of the ethnic identity of Jews, because it's spread. It's a common factor across Jews everywhere. We've all been using that language. Now, we weren't all using it for speaking, and that's why American Jews many of them don't arrive in Israel and actually be able to understand Hebrew or spoken Hebrew, even if they're observant and stuff. But it's another core part of our indigenous identity. I mean, it also places a massive tie. One of the other parts that this matters a lot to Native Americans, and we don't believe, we kind of underestimate how much it matters to us, is we bury our dead. And the land that we bury our dead on matters to us. So, and that's why Hebron is just one of the most amazing places, because it's the matriarchs and patriarchs of our religion. Now, whether you take whether you believe literally the Torah or you don't, what's hard to deny, which some people will deny, is our stories do match the places.
Oh yeah.
When you read the stories and then you go see the place where it happened, you can stand on an overlook there. And if somebody reads to you the description of Abraham picking a place to bury his wife, you can pretty much see that the obvious spot staring you right in the face where there's a massive structure now built matches the descriptions from so long ago. And again, Hebron's wonderful because of that land purchase. That land purchase recorded in meticulous detail, one of the oldest examples of property rights that we have. And that underlies our Western civilization, the idea that you can buy a piece of land, pay a fair price for it, and own it. Without that, we're communists. And unfortunately, we seem to be slipping a bit more back into communism in some of, certainly the UK, Europe, and other dark places.
I find it difficult to kind of put out to people that even though there is this connection to the land amongst the majority of Israelis, that there still is just as strong a movement within Israel to deny that connection, to say that it's not all that important, you know?
I'll tell you, there's been a massive shift in the time. I've been here about 10 years. There's been a massive shift, though, in the way the left wingers talk. So back at the time when you were here, you know, they were still clinging to the vestiges of this nonsense two-state solution that was never a solution. Mm-hmm. It was never going to be practical to hand over control of Judea and Samaria to Arab. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. It will never happen. In fact, the hat I'm wearing, if it's in mirror, it says "Build Israel Great Again." It was made by the Yesha Council, who are the council for Judea and Samaria, what the BBC would call Palestinian occupied territory, which is nothing of the sort. The change that's happened with the left here today now is the sort of urbanized Tel Aviv elites and intellectuals. They're shouting, "Build a wall." They want to build. They really want to just separate. Mm-hmm. They don't want to see Arabs. They don't want to know anything about them. They want to build the highest, tallest wall and cut themselves off from them. And we don't actually have a solid wall all the way up and down Judea-Samaria. Judea-Samaria is much more complicated. It is intermingled with Jewish towns and Arab towns. And in fact, if anybody's doing any cohabitation and living alongside people, it's the people who live out there. But you find this thing where they've got no way. They've seen now the total breakdown of trust with anybody on the Palestinian Arab side. We know that we cannot hand over control of any portion of our safety to these people. No. They will. It doesn't matter who you're negotiating with on Sunday, because on Monday it could be someone different, and the people we've got there now are terrible as well. So we know that there's going to be no reasonable way in which we can pull any kind of control out from Judea-Samaria. We pulled it out of Gaza, and look what we've got. We've got them storming the fence with 30,000 people as cover for a few, probably hundreds of terrorists trying to get really close to the fence, plant bombs, cut through, get through. And those are the ones that our snipers are picking off. But we can't have that in the West Bank is so porous. Again, and this is, I sort of see the Americans with, I've followed the whole Trump train thing. I'm very pleased still with Trump. But the idea that you hold up the West Bank as an example of where a wall works, no. We have a fence on the southern border with Egypt. That's been unbelievably successful at stopping infiltration from Africa. But we just don't physically know what to do with the West Bank at the moment. I mean, I've got ideas, I've got plans that I prefer and don't prefer, but at the moment, the status quo is not as bad as we can live with it. And I mean, I think the level of violence that we've seen from them over the last couple of years, with the sort of stabbings and the runnings over, the reason they're doing that is because we've crushed their ability to organize anything more complex. The days of the big suicide bombings or the truck or car bombs have been crushed through very, very good intelligence work, basically. And
very good intelligence work, and the idea that it's not going to be a matter of trust. It's going to be either we keep them out or we don't. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
you separate. Gaza is hard to get in and out of. It's not impossible. In fact, there's, again, stuff that's never surfaced by the world media is that there are two main crossing points now to Gaza. There's one in the south, Keren Shalom, which is the goods and services. So it's got pipelines and gas, and that's where the trucks go. But because of the level of basically terrorism, trucks cannot drive into Gaza. They drive into a huge loading area, unload all of their stuff out in the open. We check it. And then when it's been checked, the trucks drive out, stay on the Israeli side, and Palestinian trucks from Gaza drive in, pick everything up, and go in. And hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of tons of material and goods pass through there every day. I've seen it. The only time that stops is when they mortar it, which they do. They have done. And then for a couple of days, we shut it down and everybody screams and hollers that we're blockading them. But most days, I mean, I was there a couple of years ago, and there was, I was seeing, it's funny what was on the trucks. Just the day I was there, it happened to be a delivery of luxury jacuzzis, huge, giant jacuzzi baths. And so I'm sitting there and I'm reading the press that's saying it's a concentration camp and they can't eat and they've got no food. And I'm seeing there's a delivery of BMWs one day and luxury jacuzzis.
Right. It was like that even when I was there. It was unbelievable.
Going back further, actually, before the disengagement, my wife, who's Israeli, grew up here. They used to go eat fish at the restaurants in Gaza City. It's an hour and a half drive from here. They'd go and have a meal there in Gaza City. That was in the 80s, before the first Intifada.
I mean, I have cousins that lived there during the expulsion, so we know plenty about it.
It's totally different now because they wanted us out, and Sharon, for whatever reasons, took all the Jews out, and we didn't get any useful result from it except rockets and border storming. So if that is to serve as a model for what we should do in the West Bank, no way are we going to release Judea and Samaria back to anybody. Even, for example, a couple of years ago, I brought Tommy Robinson here, and that was the first time I'd ever visited a Palestinian refugee camp in Bethlehem. And it's technically illegal for me to go there as an Israeli. If you go on an organized tour, you can get permission, but I kind of a friend of mine put it together with someone who lives in the camp, who's very friendly. And what we did was we drove out of Jerusalem, because Bethlehem is almost adjacent to Jerusalem. We drove through a checkpoint, stopped at a place in what's called Area C, which is a joint control area. Well, Israeli control area. Went into Area B, which is okay. Leave my car there at a hotel, and a taxi just drove us in straight past a big red sign, which is again, no wall really. Right. Big red sign that says it is illegal for Israelis to enter. So in our own country, our own authorities, the Israeli Jewish authorities, have erected a sign saying no Israelis. But the sign doesn't actually mean no Israelis. It actually means no Israeli Jews, because nobody gives a toss if Muhammad from the Arab town in Kfar Saba, next to Kfar Saba, nobody minds if he drives in. but it's only Jews. So we've erected a sign that says Judenrein, this area, the Bethlehem, that we gave back control to the Palestinian Authority. So we went into the refugee camp, and it's not a refugee camp. I mean, it's not tents and stuff. It's proper houses. It's bad quality housing. But I can go to neighborhoods in South Tel Aviv where the Africans are living. It's just as bad. And we walk around this place. This particular camp's not very Islamic, which is a positive thing. It's not, but still, every wall is covered with the murals of their terrorists that they venerate. Kids are knocking their footballs about in the street, and there's a huge picture of a woman who killed dozens of people on a bus. That's what they're brought up, and it's just a breeding ground. And when you see these places, and then also you see that there are nice neighboring areas. People are kept in that Palestinian refugee camp because once they're in it, to make enough money to get out of it is very difficult. It is literally just kept there to destroy us. That's it. Yep. That's the only reason. And I mean, some of it makes me annoyed because I know that we have the power, we have the energy and the ability to destroy all the refugee camps. Nablus is an even better example. You can stand on a hill and look down in this Palestinian town of Nablus. You can see the 3 refugee camps because they're a different color. It would be the work of 1.5 to 2 years to build a neighborhood alongside, and there's enough space to build nice modern buildings the same as the building I'm living in. Move everybody out of that camp and then just bulldoze it and make it into a park. It would take 2 years. But the Palestinian Authority has no interest in doing that. And Israel abdicated responsibility for doing it. And nobody would let us because they would just scream it was genocide or whatever. It was bullshit. Again, these are solvable problems. Do we want to? Do we want them on our land? Well, it is, and it is our land. That's the question we're struggling with.
Well, I mean, the real question we're struggling with as well is what is the solution? Like, what is it that we're going to be able to do to ensure safety for one side and ensure freedom for the other? And I mean, with the amount of land available to the various Arab populations, I'm not sure why that's not a viable solution.
Well, the one I came from the UK, moved here. And in the UK, and it's pre-Brexit, but even now in this current middle of the road bit of Brexit, there are millions, a couple of million, maybe 3 million European citizens living in the UK, perfectly legitimately, perfectly legally. So there are Germans, French, Poles, anything, you name it. None of them get to vote in a British general election. Okay, they do not vote for an MP, a local MP, and that local MP in the British system, whoever gets the most number of those MPs is the party that chooses the Prime Minister. No foreigners living in Britain vote in that election. Now, they can vote in local elections for local town councils, and EU citizens do vote in local elections in the UK. But what you've got there is a model where there is some would say a German living in England who can then do a postal vote for Merkel or for someone else in Germany. Is England still a democracy if it's got millions of people living there who are not able to vote? So the model I like to look at is to say, if you're not willing to be a full member of Israeli society, if you're not willing to say, I am an Israeli, I pledge allegiance to Israel, which is going to be a majority Jewish state, take a citizenship elsewhere. My personal preference is that Jordan is already Palestine. Rename that if you need that name. As far as I'm concerned, Ramallah, which again, the way things have grown, Ramallah sits just to the north of Jerusalem, and they've almost joined up at this point. The northern suburbs of Jerusalem have spread, and the southern suburbs. Ramallah, call it North Jerusalem. There you go. You got your capital.
Right.
And the idea that people could live, that we could have sovereignty over the whole of Judea and Samaria, but that 2 million odd people living there could have citizenship connected with a country that's outside. So they would have their representation. There's a direct link from the West Bank into Jordan. You've got your residency. You're a resident of this land, but you're not a citizen. You vote in local elections, which is essentially what they have now if they were to ever hold their elections. But would that mean that Israel's not a democracy? Now that, that the American left-wing Jews would scream blue murder and say, Israel's not a democracy unless everybody can vote. Well, democracy is actually plugged into Judaism. It's not essential or core to us. Why are we letting it be used as a tool, as a weapon against us?
Well, that's actually what they're looking for. They're not actually looking for a type of fairness that they claim to argue for. What they're looking for is the ability to control whatever's happening. You know what I'm saying? And when you look at like Sarah Silverman's sister, who's over there right now, Soros funded with a pocket full of cash from the reform movement, fighting for the Africans that we've now worked out a humane thing for. I
Yes.
mean, you would think that they would be all for it. Like, we've worked out a humane solution to illegal invaders, and no, they're there saying that no, these Africans should stay. That even though they're not citizens, even though they're harming our citizens, that they should be allowed to stay.
Yeah, listen. This is where it's funny to watch the alt-right in certain circumstances, because they are reading and quoting from the equivalent of MSNBC. That's their sole source of news on, how Israel is dealing with 50, 60,000 African, what we call infiltrators. Again, thankfully, our press, the language used in the Hebrew, they settled on this word infiltrator very early, and it stuck. And that makes the whole debate much easier because, again, in America, you're fighting over DACA, dreamers. Who wouldn't want to see dreamers stay?
Right.
Well, we call them damn infiltrators. And immediately the left is on the back foot with the term infiltrator, because language is very, very important. There's a great essay by George Orwell called Politics in the English Language. Google that, Politics in the English Language by George Orwell. It is unbelievably important how one uses language. And so it's actually not very controversial here. I mean, we get demonstrations of 10,000, 15,000 people showing up in the middle of Tel Aviv. But a few years ago, they were having 200,000 or 300,000 who were there. And that, again, that was another far left demonstration. It was sort of sparked over the price of cottage cheese, but it ticked all the usual liberal boxes. But what I'm saying is that the demonstrations now for the Africans are not of a huge scale. And every time anybody polls the public, it's like, yeah, we need to solve this. We don't need to be cruel and horrible. If people have had kids here and married Israelis, we can discuss things. And again, if I come back to the indigenous thing, Judaism is not wholly about blood. It's not about blood quantum. Blood is one of the important parts of what makes people ethnically Jewish, but we accept converts. And the law of return is written in such a way. By the way, I don't like that name. If you want to talk about that, it's another side trip we can go down. But we allow people to convert into Judaism. And when you convert into Judaism, if you do it through an Orthodox rabbi and so forth, you are immediately eligible for citizenship of Israel, which is a phenomenal thing. I mean, every country gets to choose who should be its citizens. The fact that the Western Europe and America have, over the last 30 or 40 years, sort of forgotten that they should choose. But we choose. Israel's got a set of rules. If it's it seems to me odd that people look at our country and think that because there are lots of left-wing Jews outside of America, outside of Israel, that we are going to be like them. And Israel is becoming less and less like diaspora American Jewry or European Jewry. I mean, and that's where the tension is rising. They don't like it. They look at Israel and they're scared of what we are because we're proud and strong.
I argue this in my debates with different alt-righters, and I always get at least one or two people that show up in my chats trying to call me a hypocrite for what I support in Israel, because they don't realize that I'm actually a fan of ethno-nationalism in general. I don't believe that white people in America should have any less connection to their land here in America than Jews do to Israel. And I also don't believe that Americans should have the ability to sit back and go, oh no, well, we're a multi-ethnic society and therefore, you know, I always say if they want to form their ethno state in any part of America, I don't believe America is going to survive as 50 connected states for all eternity anyway. I don't believe that they have the ability to. You know what I'm saying? I believe that there's absolutely a place for a white America that decides who gets in the first place, who stays, who comes in the future. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I don't sit here and say, no, white Americans don't deserve this. They should have to live with Africans, or they should have to live with Jews, or they should have to live with anybody. All I have ever said or asked of them is just leave me out of it. I don't like, I don't want to live there myself. So I'm not asking to be a part of it. You know, like they usually come at me as like, oh, but you want me to accept your family as part of this and this and this because you consider yourself white. I don't, for the purposes of this argument, I'm not white. I don't care.
I agree. Listen, as soon as I picked up this Indigenous thing, it suddenly became obvious to me. I'm not white. I didn't grow up. I was not the same as the white British English people I grew up with and were my friends in England. I'm just not the same. I'm a Jew. I know. I always knew back then I was a Jew. One of the things that sort of predicated my exit from the UK was the sort of just this feeling of othership. I just didn't fully belong, even though I'd grown up there. But I mean, as to America, I think one of the things that ails that, and it's quite funny to watch them make this attempt, what ails this white nationalist movement that, I mean, I followed this since before the alt-right just meant, you know, when the alt-right wasn't a poisonous term, as it, I guess, has become. What they've fallen for is that they're trying to create an identity. And I see that so clearly. So they're trying to create some online presence, identity, whatever you call it, that encompasses Scandinavian people with white skin and Germans with white skin and French people and Italians with white skin and people from Arkansas and people from Nebraska. I'm sorry, you've got lots of indigenous identities. You've got your own identities in your locales, but they are not to create a pan-white identity and then stick to that. You're going to find it very difficult because what does a French person from the south of France really have in common with someone from Omaha? I don't see it.
I mean, someone in the chat is bringing up an interesting point that I often say too, is that in America, it's not as much the death of whiteness as it is the death of religion. You know what I'm saying? There always was a special place in America for Christianity, and I've never once in my life felt that was an oppressive force on anybody in America. I also never.
I grew up the same thing in England. I went to a school. We sang hymns every morning. I know all of the Christian hymns. We said the Lord's Prayer. I stood up. My mouth didn't move, but I had no problem with that.
I don't understand why it's a problem. I don't understand why people made it a problem. And I remember there was someone at my high school, a teacher that was a Reformed Jew, and she would get so bent out of shape at the idea of a Christmas tree going up and not a menorah at the same time. And I used to get so offended at the idea that this woman had this belief that she could speak for me, because I had no problem with the Christmas tree. B, I had no idea why the menorah mattered. And I don't understand why every culture and every ethnicity can't be given a holiday where they're allowed to celebrate their holiday, whether majority or minority. There's no reason why one has to co-opt the other. And I've never understood why that is a value to anyone.
What strikes me though is, and I've driven extensively around America. I did some big drives back, when I left university. I did crazy stuff like drive from Chicago down through, don't get me, Chicago, eventually Arkansas, and then Texas, and then back through Louisiana and back to Chicago. And I've done drives on the West Coast, California and Nevada and so on. You've got these fantastic identities. They're called states. Your state identities are actually really strong. And like the border between Arkansas and Texas, you cross that kind of weird artificial line, because it's sort of a semi-artificial line, but the language changes. It's unbelievable, the differences. Those are identities, I think, personally. And sure, you can find a way of coming together and promoting interests that cross those identities, but trying to follow the left down this role of creating fake identities everywhere, the LGBTQIAAP. Well, identity. It's not an identity. It's rubbish. They don't love each other. I mean, they're at odds all the time. Lesbians and gays are, I've got a very, very good gay friend in the UK. Get along with lesbians just because he's in the same acronym with them? Are you kidding me? And it's the same with think back to what really makes you who you are, what you want to express. If skin color is the only thing you can settle on, I don't think you're trying very
hard. Someone just said something interesting in the chat, which I'm responding to. They said that a lot of people in America think Netanyahu speaks for most Jews. And God. I answered that I can't stand the guy. So, I mean, that doesn't really help. But then he said
Netanyahu is so complicated because to the outside world, Jews outside love him, even some not left-leaning, but center Jews in America love him. I can't explain to you how much he is hated here.
I know.
It's bizarre. I think that as far as leading Israel on a world stage through the 8 years of Obama, I don't think anybody else could have done that. I think he did about as well as it's possible to do. But he's not strong. Again, that's the other thing, is the BBC will call him hardliner or hard right or hawkish. He hasn't built in Judea Samaria like we should be. I mean, he's blocked. Anywhere. No, he's actually not done the things that that the world portrays him as having done. It's rubbish. So I wouldn't be upset if we had elections now, because I think we'd swing even further to the right here. I don't like left and right, but right here meaning accepting Judea and Samaria is ours and just building some more houses, because we need a hell of a lot more houses. Our population is growing at an incredible rate because we're having babies, because we're optimistic. I live in a very secular neighborhood in northern Tel Aviv, and it's not religious at all around here, but 3 kids is the normal now, 3 and up. And these are secular families. You can rest assured that the religious families are having 8, 9, 10. So if the secular families are having 3 and up, that's why our population is increasing, and we've got people coming in from outside, from France and South America, actually quite a lot.
We're talking about an interesting topic in the chat, which I kind of like to bring up, especially when I'm talking to people that have lived or do live in Israel, is that a lot of times the word Zionist gets thrown around there. And I absolutely hate the word. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Because it means such different things to different people. If you ask me, am I a Zionist? And I say, okay, well, do I believe that the Jews deserve their own homeland? Of course I do. So in that sense, I am a Zionist. Does that mean I believe in a secular Jewish state completely devoid of any Judaism? Of course not, which would make me almost anti-Zionist. Do I believe in the righteousness of someone like Bibi Netanyahu or any of them? Of course not. Do I believe that Zionism gives me the right to go and do whatever I want because, after all, it's God's word? No. It's such a terrible word to describe Jews after the state was created. You know, like before that, it was easy. The Zionists were the ones who believed that the Jews needed their own state. That was a very easy term, and it was, and then it just got corrupted to the point where it's kind of like here when you call somebody a racist. You know, it's just you could always call someone an anti-Zionist in Israel, and that can mean anything. You know, like if someone says, "Oh, I don't believe in socialized medicine," oh, you're an anti-Zionist. You know, or like, "I don't believe that Jews should live here," oh, you're an anti-Zionist. "I believe Jews should here," oh, you're an anti-Zionist. You know,
I don't believe Jews should live in Judea Samaria, but I do believe they should live in Tel Aviv. Anti-Zionist. You're exactly right. But again, Politics in the English Language by George Orwell. Read that essay. It doesn't mention this.
I know exactly what you're talking about. So
this was one of those examples where they took a word and twisted it and twisted all the meaning out of it. But it has such a deep meaning for us that I don't think we'll ever lose it. But again, Israel is the country where we have arguments in parliament over whether they should work on Shabbat to make the railway line open on time, the fast railway to Jerusalem that we're building at the moment. We had huge parliamentary debates over this, which I think is a healthy thing. I don't believe we should be secular, and I don't believe we should be religious. We should be the place where those two things go backwards and forwards, and we actually get to discuss these things. When Jews live in America, they do not ask America to bend to their will. They might want their little neighborhood where the cars can't drive through it. And if enough of them live in one place and create a little Orthodox enclave, perhaps nobody will drive through it. But they don't force this on people. Israel's the place where, a great example, you'll know this. I think Jews outside of Israel don't know this. On Yom Kippur, which is the supposedly highest religious day, although it's complicated, on Yom Kippur, nobody drives here. The Jews don't drive. I have checked. There is absolutely no legal reason not to drive. There is no law in the state of Israel that says you cannot drive on Yom Kippur. There's no law that says you can't drive on Shabbat. Now, I'll drive on Shabbat, but I will not drive on Yom Kippur. Why? Because the streets are filled with kids on bicycles. Mm-hmm. Okay? 6, 8, 10-lane highway. Ayalon. I've ridden on the Ayalon highway with my 6-year-old on his little bike. I mean, getting up and down the on-ramps is actually a lot harder than it looks when you do it in a car. But I've done it just for just because you can. Because on that day, all the cars stop. But there's no law that says the cars should stop. In fact, Arabs do drive in their towns. Sometimes they drive dangerously where they shouldn't be. The main reason not to drive is because it's hideously dangerous. But what it means is that when it's coming up, and this took me by surprise the first year I was here. So again, all my family, my wife's family, not religious. So everybody drives on Shabbat. If we want to go to the beach, we get in the car, we go to the beach. On Yom Kippur, everybody about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody's like, you got to be where you have to be. I'm like, why does it matter? I want to drive. It's like, no, you can't drive. Then what do you mean I can't drive? I drive on Shabbat. No, you'll see. And Yom Kippur, the first Yom Kippur I was here, we go out at like 7 o'clock in the evening after the sun has gone down. The roads are just literally, all the local roads are just packed with children on bicycles. It's chaos. It's bicycles, it's skateboards. But again, there's no law. If you get in your car, you don't break a law. If the police see you, they'll ask you what you're doing. If you want to drive to the hospital because your wife's in labor, you can drive to the hospital, or you should call an ambulance. And the police will be driving. But this is the tension, the correct tension, and the correct place where we can have a tension between religious and secular. Most of the country is secular law. There are some places like marriage where I think we probably gave a bit too much control to the religious. But again, the longer I've gone on here, the more positive I've seen the influence of at least having these debates. And what you're losing in the West, what you've lost in Europe completely, is a respect for where you come from, a respect for how you got to be the civilizations. That's why they're destroying freedom of speech in the UK, because they've completely forgotten why it matters. They won't probably destroy freedom of speech so much in Poland or Hungary or the Eastern Bloc, because it's within living memory as to what happens when you don't have those freedoms. That's there's a tension that's correct. We must have an argument in Israel over whether the shop should open on Shabbat. Prefer that some remain open, because that's just me, but it's correct to have the debate.
I remember my first Yom Kippur in Israel totally freaked me out. Like I was also living in Tel Aviv at the time, and I remember like I wasn't religious even in the slightest. So I remember just walking outside and not seeing a car anywhere, and everybody was in the streets, and I didn't know what to make of it, you know. And then like me and a buddy, we were like, oh, where can we go get? We figured in Tel Aviv you can go find a restaurant. Nothing was open.
Nothing is open.
So creepy. Like and at the same time, it was like it was really nice. Like it was just really cool to see this entire country come together over something, regardless of how they viewed it.
There's I had an electric car here for 5 years with Better Place. Long story I'm not going to go into, but while I was doing that, I was interested. I had the electric car actually for ideological reasons, not for global warming, which is bullshit. I had it for the reason of not wanting to give money to people who hate me, as in Arab oil money. So I had this car for 5 years and didn't use a drop of petrol or oil. Fantastic. The air on Yom Kippur, within about 2 or 3 hours of the start, the air is measurably cleaner. And they've done the research. You just take the cars off the road for 2 hours, pollution levels just drop everywhere. And even the power stations scale back, all heavy industry and light industry stops, trains stop. They close the airspace. You can look on flight radar. And about 2 hours before Yom Kippur starts, planes start diverting around Israel. So even a plane flying, say, to Amman in Jordan that would normally cross Israel, we divert them round. They have to spend an extra half an hour going around us. That I think is a beautiful thing. It's a tradition. I mean, obviously, there's no Talmudic or Torah stipulation that you have to close your airspace to crossing jetliners. Nobody knew about those things. But we've decided to do it, and we're a sovereign nation, and hell, okay, you can't use our airspace for 26 hours. Get over it. And they all do. Nobody dies. Nobody, it doesn't cause the world to end if Jews just stop. Now, of course, 1 year, that was the year that the Arabs chose, that was the day the Arabs chose to invade. Again, comes back to the point, it's a religious war we're fighting. They know it's a religious war. We have chosen for years to believe the lie that it's over land. It's not. They're just trying to kick us out because, and perhaps we should end. I don't know. I can't go on too much longer.
No, I only got another couple minutes anyway.
We're Jews. We're the indigenous people. All our culture, all our customs. Even if I wasn't born here, somewhere quite easily to find, because I've got a huge family tree, you can find the point at which my family left and my genes left it. But even without that, even if I was a convert, and I know some converts who live here, if you convert to Judaism and you feel Judaism in you, and oftentimes they say people converting to Judaism, and they dig a bit harder, they find that once upon a time somebody was Jewish, and it's just a rekindling of what was there. Mm-hmm. When you do that, you are adopting traditions and cultures, many of which, in fact, all of the significant ones, trace to this land. That's undeniable. And when if a Muslim Arab, when he prays in East Jerusalem, he sticks his bum in the air towards Al-Aqsa, mm-hmm. and he prays towards Mecca, because at one point they prayed towards Jerusalem, they say. I'm not sure I believe them, but their cultural awakening, their civilization, that came from the area now known as Saudi Arabia. That's the indigenous lands of Islam. Islam then conquered a large part of the world through the sword. That's not who Jews are. Jews have not really conquered much. We did have at one time a bigger Israel than we've got now, but right now the core of Israel, Jerusalem, Hebron, Tzfat, Shechem, Nablus. These are the places that we venerate, that we revere. Even Gaza actually has some significance to us, but for pragmatic reasons, we've kind of, there's Samson and Delilah story is probably down there on the coast, Ashkelon, and maybe a bit south. But Israel's back, you know, that's who we are. We've returned in greater numbers, and we never left, but it's good to be back.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? Let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and on Facebook and everywhere else. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope we get to have
I'm glad we got to have it.
I'm really hoping we can have some more of these in the future.
I'm Brian of London, all one word, Brian of London. That comes from when I used to live in London, but I made the move to Israel about nine and a half years ago. I'm on Twitter as Brian of London. Facebook, I am Brian John Thomas. It's an in-joke. If you're British, you'll know exactly. It was me telling Facebook to F off when they said that the name of London wasn't real. So Brian of London on Twitter, Brian John Thomas on Facebook, Brian of London, the page on Facebook, and Israeli Cool, the blog I write at sometimes.
So I am found at halseynews.com. You can email me at info@halseynews.com if you want to get in touch with me or any of my guests. You can find me on Twitter at Halsey English. You can find me on Facebook at Halsey News Network. Been a great night. Thank you very much, Brian, for being here, and look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Cheers, and good luck, America.